Hello, I'm Michael Levine, and welcome to another edition of Without Notes. Today, our guest is a Hollywood legend, but a legend of a different kind. He is the country's best-known private investigator, Hollywood private investigator, and I thought it would be fascinating to talk to Scott Ross about how his most unusual life has unfolded, working on some of the biggest trials in the last 3 decades. So now you finish the McMartin case. You learn that being involved as a private investigator in a high-profile case is a twin-edged sword.
Yeah.
What becomes the next big case that you're involved in?
The next one that was in the media didn't come along until the 90s, and that was the LAPD Rampart scandal.
Let's talk about that,
Okay.
because again, many people watching the show throughout the world don't know what you're speaking about.
Right.
LAPD, Los Angeles
Police Department had an internal scandal, allegedly, that several police officers were making up reports, false allegations, developing reports, arresting people falsely, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. In a certain division within the city. Correct.
The division being that of Rampart Division.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the acronym, but they were called crash officers. It's, I don't know, something to do with gangs. I don't remember. LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, loves acronyms.
And you were a private investigator for who?
For the defendants. There were four police officers that were charged.
What do you do? Because most people don't know what a private investigator does. What is it that your responsibilities include?
Police the police.
Police the police.
It's that simple. There are rules and regulations that are in place. The police are required to follow those rules.
Yep.
As time has gone on, they have done less and less and less of following those rules. The LAPD will, not just the LAPD, I don't want to, but they will target somebody and then sort of take that opportunity to prove their point as opposed to actually solving a crime like it was when I was a kid growing up. You know, even the old radio show, the old TV show Dragnet, the issue was to find out who was committing the crime, not just target somebody and go after them. Mm-hmm. You know, give you a classic example in state versus federal. You know, the feds investigate first and then they arrest you. State law enforcement arrest you and then they investigate. You know,
well, that seems...
It's absurd, and that's why you hear all of these cases that go to federal court that they don't lose because they've investigated the case,
first.
Period. So again...
So when you're working on this LAPD case, you have 4 police officers charged with a crime. You're hired by the attorney to do some investigative work on behalf of the police officers to find out if your client's rights have been...
Well, if they've been violated, or if, I'll give you a great example, and in fact, they called as their first witness in Rampart. So in the discovery, we received probably close to 600,000 documents, which I read every single page.
Wow.
Believe it or not.
You have a heavy reading load.
And the problem with that is I can remember those pages. And one of the things...
Do you have a photographic memory?
I don't know. I don't think so. But I know...
You have a very good memory.
Yeah, sadly. Yeah, it drives my wife nuts.
Yes.
She'll say something and she'll say you're not listening and I repeat it verbatim and then she tells me what a moron I am.
Right.
But in this particular case, there was what was called the vacation day involving one of the officers, and there was a time card that we had received a copy of, and the documents all had what are called Bates stamp numbers. The documents are all numbered individually. And we had received a time card, a copy of a time card. That time card wasn't wasn't signed by Sergeant Ortiz. Further on in the discovery, thousands of pages later, I find another copy of it, and this one is signed by Sergeant Ortiz. Well, how's that possible? He's been suspended. He's not going back signing documents. He's not turning in a time card of one of the officers. Yeah, it's absurd. So it was one of the first things that I brought out, and the first witness for the prosecution was a handwriting expert to say that's his signature. You know.
So you're looking for inconsistencies, things that refute or defend your... Okay, so then the Rampart case, did that settle favorably for you?
Yeah, of sorts. 3 of the 4 were convicted.
That's not favorable.
Well, everybody left the room except me. I stayed with the DAs. I wanted to hear what the jurors had to say. And when the jurors started to describing how they came to the decision, it's like, okay, they didn't understand the instructions. It was evident to me. So I went and I grabbed, it was with Harlan Braun. I went and I grabbed Harlan and I said, we have a problem. I explained the situation, Harlan Braun and Barry Levin. And I went back in and talked to Judge Connor and explained the situation. And it was being recorded by the media, so it was being confirmed what they said. And she said, gave me special permission. She said, go get me declaration. So I went out and I interviewed the jurors, and the verdict was ultimately reversed.
Well, that was reversed.
Right.
Then what becomes your next large case, Scott?
2001, it would have been Robert Blake, right? Pretty much at the end of the Rampart case. It would have been
Robert Blake, the very famous Hollywood actor, is accused of murder his ex-wife, is that right?
Murdering his wife. Nope, they were still married when she was killed. And
who is the attorney?
Again, Harlan Braun.
Harlan Braun is the attorney for Robert Blake. You are the private investigator.
Correct.
You are assigned. Had you ever met Robert Blake?
No.
Okay, so you meet Robert Blake. Robert Blake is a very unusual
That's polite.
gentleman. And what becomes your work on the Robert Blake case?
Well, they didn't charge him for a year. So we went, myself, there was another private investigator, Doyle Stepp. We went around the country and basically started to interview, I don't want to say potential suspects, but people that were connected to Bonnie, because Bonnie Bakley was the wife, the victim, because her story wasn't as cut and dried as it was being portrayed by law enforcement. Essentially, we determined she was sort of a con artist grifter, and they tried to downplay that it was nickel and dime. And that was completely inaccurate. We found people she stole hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars from.
So there were people that potentially had a motive to kill her. Correct. Because she was a grifter. And
correct.
Question, just a parenthetical question about your work. Will you represent a client that you feel to be guilty?
Sure.
So, that is
with one exception.
That's an astounding comment to many listening to the show. But I want to ask you, please, if you would be kind enough to explain your moral justification. I know attorneys have a moral justification that even guilty people are entitled to a fair trial. Tell me your moral justification for representing people that you don't know, but you think to be guilty.
Yeah, I don't know that I would even qualify it as a moral justification. More importantly, here's my problem. If somebody doesn't keep an eye on law enforcement, then they're going to start to run amok. If somebody doesn't keep an eye on the police and tell them what you're doing is wrong, they're going to start to run amok.
No question.
I had a very, very, wasn't famous, it was in the media, a case where this gentleman allegedly threw his 4-year-old daughter off a cliff. He didn't do it, she fell, but what he did was negligent, so I get it. And the point being is that the next day when the sheriff's department is there investigating it, the detective says on the video, now when we present this to the jury, when we bring them out here, so it's like less than 24 hours, you've already made up your mind, we're going to prosecute this guy.
You said that there was one example of when you would not represent somebody.
Yeah, I like animals better than people, so I don't do any animal cases. I don't even want anything to do with them.
So
you want to kill your child, feel free. You want to hurt your dog, don't call me. Sorry.
Let's turn now, pivot to some of the Robert Blake. How does that end? Not guilty?
Well, he was acquitted, and again, the issue with Robert Blake is he just simply didn't pull the trigger. Now I have my own theory and my own beliefs about what actually took place, and if he doesn't stop talking, I'm going to go public with it. But point being is that he didn't pull the trigger. And instead of the, again, this is one of those political issues similar to that of attorneys who prosecuted Phil Spector. I had nothing to do with it. Who decide...
You did not work on that
no,
case?
But they decide that they have enough sort of public name recognition to run for DA. So there was a district attorney that I believe that had the same similar aspirations. And if they had charged him with the solicitation, they probably would have gotten guilty. But that's not what they did. They basically charged him with the murder, saying he pulled the trigger. And by the way, if he didn't, he hired someone to do it. You can't have it both ways.
Right.
And so with Blake, yeah, he was acquitted.
So that was, from your perspective, because he was a client, a
Right.
victory for you. Then what case comes next?
Well, what happened with Blake is Blake insisted on doing the interview with Barbara Walters. And so Harlan Braun said to get a new lawyer. He ended up getting Tom Mesereau. I had never...
Harlan Braun quit the case?
Quit the case.
Because he found what... That
Well, because Blake wouldn't stop talking, and he was going to do this interview with Barbara
Harlan
Walters.
quit.
And Harlan said, you need to get a new lawyer. And he ended
hired
up...
Tom Mesereau.
He ended up hiring Tom Mesereau. And I knew Tom from before, and I always liked him. And so I'd had over 2 years into the case. And so I told Harlan that I'm going to go with Tom to get him through the prelim.
Right.
The preliminary hearing on Robert Blake. So if you're okay with that, and of course Harlan's Harlan, so he was fine. And then when Tom ultimately told Blake get a new attorney for similar reasons, I guess, to Harlan,
Tom Mesereau
quit the case, and then he was hired on Michael Jackson. So Tom called me and said, you want to go to Santa Maria with me to go do Michael Jackson?
Now, this is the Michael Jackson case in Santa Barbara.
Correct.
So you and Tom Mesereau, famed attorney, go up and represent Michael Jackson.
And Susan Yu.
And Susan Yu.
People forget Susan, and she did an amazing job, so
Okay.
I don't want that to happen.
That was a spectacle trial, almost
I've never seen anything like it. It was
Nothing.
absurd.
we've never seen.
Yeah.
anything like that.
One of the single most relieving factors is when Judge Melville issued a gag order that we didn't have to talk to anybody. In fact, we weren't allowed to talk to anybody. It's like great. I could walk to and from the courtroom and nobody was allowed to talk to me. It was wonderful. So,
And then that becomes a victory for Tom Mesereau and yourself. That thrusts you both into the super stratosphere. And what becomes your next case?
the next case to hit the media?
Yes, the big case.
Big case,
yeah.
well, would have been Bill Cosby.
Bill Cosby.
And again, same thing. I maintained my relationship with Tom, the same way I had for many years.
Yep.
And when Tom was hired on to
Tom
represent
Mesereau becomes the attorney for
Bill Cosby, second trial, same thing. Said, do you want to go to Philadelphia?
My name is Michael Levine, and thank you so much for watching this episode of Without Notes. Now, if you've enjoyed it, and I hope you have, please like us on Facebook and subscribe to us on YouTube. And most importantly, stay tuned for the next episode.